Welcome to the final episode. We end at Crowley's Ridge State Park. Here, water is not always visible, but it is shaping the land. In soil, forests, and quiet systems beneath our feet, water is at work. This is where the story slows down, but does not stop. Crowley's Ridge feels different the moment you notice it. Not because it's dramatic, but it's because you wouldn't expect it to be here. Of the flat Mississippi alluvial plain, surrounded by farmland that stretches long, interruptible lines. The sudden rise in elevation, a forested ridge that breaks the pattern of everything around it. It feels like it doesn't belong, but of course it does. It just belongs to a much older version of the landscape. Crowley's Ridge was formed through ancient shifts in the Mississippi River system. Over thousands of years, as the river changed course, it left behind deposits of erosion patterns that slowly shaped this elevated landform. What remains today is not a mountain built upward, but a ridge left behind as water moved through the world around it. That idea is important, because it means this place exists because the water did not stay still. It moved, shifted direction. It carved new paths and abandoned old ones. And what we are standing on is the trace behind. Unlike the more dramatic water features in other parks, like waterfalls or large reservoirs, water here is not always obvious. There is no single dominant flow that defines the landscape. Instead, water shows up in much smaller, quieter ways. In soil moisture, drainage patterns, seasonal streams that appear and disappear depending on rainfall, and the kinds of plants that grow here compared to the surrounding delta farmland. It is less about what the water looks like and more about what it allows to exist, and what makes it harder to notice at first important. The ridge itself supports ecosystems that are noticeably different from flat agriculture land around it. The soil here drains differently. The elevation changes how water moves through the ground, and because of that, forests can grow in ways that would not be possible just a few miles away. Even small lakes and wetlands scattered across the ridge have become important habitats. They support species that are less common in the surrounding delta region, creating pockets of biodiversity in landscapes that otherwise look familiar, ununiform from a distance. So even though this place might not feel visually dramatic, ecological distinct, and the distinction is tied directly to the water. There is something interesting about how water behaves here compared to other parks in the series. At Mount Magazine, the water begins as headwaters. At Devil's Den, it becomes visible movement and erosion. At Lake Ouachita, it is controlled and managed. At Pettigene, it becomes a waterfall and a clear moment of transition. But here, at Crowley's Ridge, water is mostly invisible, and yet it still shapes everything. That is what makes this place easy to overlook, but important, because water does not always need to be seen to have influence. Sometimes, its impact is slow, distributed, and built into a structure of the land itself. So instead of carving visible features like waterfalls or canyons, it shapes patterns, what grows, what survives, how ecosystems organize themselves over time. Crowley's Ridge also connects it to a much larger system beyond itself. The same river that forces this shape was also shaped the Mississippi Delta around it. That means that this landscape is not isolated. It's just part of a broader regional story of water movement, sediment, and change. Agriculture, settlement patterns, and community development in this region have all been influenced, directly or indirectly, by how the water shaped the lands. Even if that influence is not immediately visible, and that is the part what makes water difficult to fully recognize in a place like this. It's not always dramatic. It's structural. It defines what is possible before anything else begins. There is also a kind of quietness here that feels different than other parks. Not silence exactly, but a sense that change is happening at a slower scale. You don't see water cutting through rocks or falling over cliffs. You don't see the large reservoirs or rushing headwaters, but instead you see the results of long-term shaping. Land that has been organized by movement that has happened long before anything human was here to observe it. And that is what can make it easy to forget that water is still involved at all. But it is. It always is. What Crowley's Ridge really shows is that water influence is not always about force or speed. Sometimes it's about consistency over time, and how something as simple as drainage patterns or soil saturation can determine entire ecological systems. It asks you to pay attention in a different way, not to what is loud or obvious, but to what is subtle and persistent, because those are often the forces that shape things most completely. And maybe that is what the larger takeaway from this entire series of places. Water does not only appear as rivers or lakes or waterfalls. It does not only show itself in the dramatic landscapes or obvious movement. It exists in the background of everything, in soil, in vegetation, in landforms that seem still, but they are actually the result of long histories of movement. It connects all these places, even when it doesn't look the same in each one. At Mount Magazine it begins. At Devil's Den it moves and reshapes. At Lake Ouachita it is managed and controlled. At Petit Jean it becomes visible in transformation. Here at Crowley's Ridge it becomes structure itself, not always seen, but always present. So, when you stand here, looking out at the ridge and surrounding the land, what are you really seeing? It's not just landscape. You're seeing the long memory of water, a record of movement that shaped everything around it quietly over time, without needing to announce itself. And even now, it is still doing the same thing. Just slowly enough, you have to pay attention to notice. Across these places, Mount Magazine, Devil's Den, Lake Ouachita, Petit Jean, and Crowley's Ridge, water takes on a completely different form. It begins in the headwaters of the top mountain, through stone carving landscapes, becomes stored and managed in a reservoir, and a single drop of visible movement at a waterfall. It turns into sound, and it disappears into patterns in the lands that most people never directly notice. But in every version, it is the same thing, a system in motion, a force that connects everything that passes through it. Water does not stay in one place for long. It moves. It carries the memories that has changed. It connects every landscape in Arkansas into one continuous story, not as separate places, but as one entire system, always flowing and becoming something new.